Good morning. See, you guys talk back. Not every church does that. It's a good deal. It's a good thing, really. All right. Hold, there's a button. Oh, there we go. Look at it. So I grew up in a little place called Branchton, which is just south of Cambridge, which is kind of Kitchener-Waterloo region-ish. And when I was a kid, we had dairy cattle, and so you had to milk morning and night. There we go. You had to milk morning and night, and so Sundays were times when the chores that had to be done got done, but we didn't do any extra work on Sunday. So it didn't matter what the weather was or the forecast or anything like that. There was no baling of hay on a Sunday. There was no fixing equipment on a Sunday unless it was like the well pump or something. But we would often go for these Sunday afternoon drives around southern Ontario, and occasionally we would stop in at a relative's for a visit. And I have a lot of relatives. And some of them get kind of cranky if they find out you were in their area and didn't stop by. You guys don't have any of those, right? So I remember a few visits to one particular aunt and uncle, but there's one visit that stands out that reminds me of this scripture passage. Now, this was way back before cell phones, of course, and you just stopped by my dad's family. That was the family tradition if you were in the area. And so we stopped by late afternoon, and there was this tantalizing smell of roast beef wafting through the air. Oh, yum. And so my aunt fairly soon asked if we wanted to stay for supper, and my parents said yes. And my sister and I were dispatched to the kitchen to help my aunt. And we were probably about 5 and 9 at the time, so old enough to be at least a little bit helpful. And my aunt visited the cold cellar, and she opened cupboards and freezers, pulled things out of the fridge, and before long there were bowls and baskets and plates along the counter and the table in the kitchen. We peeled potatoes, we arranged cheese on some of the plates, we put an assortment of pickles in bowls, poured vegetables she'd frozen into pots. And then my cousin, her son, showed up with his 2 kids. His family stopped by. There were now 10 of us for supper. Peeled a few more potatoes and put them on the stove, opened another bag of frozen vegetables. This seemed like an immense amount of food for this group of people. But it soon became clear why. You see, the delicious roast my aunt had prepared was not really very big. It was just the 2 of them. And they wouldn't have wanted to eat roast beef for the next 7 days. So she'd pulled it out of the oven, and as I stirred the small sauce pot of gravy on the stove, I wondered how in the world this was going to feed 6 adults and 4 children. And yet it did, and there was enough, and there were even some leftovers that needed to be packed up and put in the fridge. The story of the loaves and fishes is a fascinating one for me. I have loved this story since I was a child, and it's included in all 4 of the Gospels. It's a beautiful example of God's provision. In a space of lack and want, there is suddenly an abundance. Suddenly, there is more than is needed, so much more. Now, have you ever wondered about the boy in the story? I sometimes wish that I could dig through these stories in the Bible and get more detail, because the detail that's there just isn't always enough to satisfy my curiosity. And I wonder about the boy. He's described as a boy or as a lad, depending on the translation, probably a preteen, perhaps still a small child. We don't know. And I wonder, had he come to the hillside with his family? Had his mother lovingly wrapped up some fresh bread for him? Were the 5 loaves and 2 fish supposed to be a meal for the whole family, or just for him? Was he a quiet and a thoughtful boy who carefully considered what giving away his food might mean? Or was he rash and impetuous, an act first and perhaps regret later kind of kid? Were his parents proud of his generous actions that day? Or in that moment, were they a little bit horrified that he had so carelessly given away the food? When I was a child, I liked to identify with that little boy, and I could imagine myself being the one who generously shared what I had and, walking over to the disciples and saying, "Here, I have something." As I've gotten older, though, I tend to identify a little more with Philip and Andrew. They are the realists. They are serious, and they are very focused on what is and is not possible. I've lost a little bit of my childhood optimism when anything seemed like it could happen. But this story fascinates me because Jesus, again, turns their and our understanding of what is and is not possible completely upside down. So I want you to note the question that Jesus asks Philip. Where shall we buy bread? Not should we buy bread, or is there money to buy bread, but where? The presumption is that we are going to buy bread. Where shall we go? But Philip doesn't answer that question. Philip responds to Jesus' question by saying 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each person to have one bite. And I can picture Philip, eyebrows raised, arms open wide as if to say, are you kidding me? Have you looked around? Let me give you a minute. We're on a hillside. It's not like there's a bakery down the road or a grocery store down the street. Seriously, Jesus, what are you thinking? 8 months' wages wouldn't be enough to buy food for this crowd. Where can we buy bread is a ridiculous question from Philip's point of view. And it seems a bit strange under the circumstances. And then there's Andrew. I imagine Andrew chatting with a small boy, a young lad, a young man perhaps, who somehow caught his attention. Perhaps Andrew pats the boy on the shoulder, gives him a gentle smile, and takes him over to Jesus. Andrew knows that this isn't really going to help. This isn't enough. The boy might as well keep his meal, at least then he'd have something to eat. But Andrew accepts what the boy offers and says, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But it's not enough. And in some translations, you do see those words small, emphasizing that it's meager, it's little, it's definitely not enough. And it's a not enough mindset. There isn't enough money to feed everyone. There isn't enough bread and fish to feed everyone. There is simply not enough. And if Jesus could simply fix the problem by making bread appear, why would he bother to ask Philip where to buy bread? Why not just get everyone's attention? Yoo-hoo, over here. Bread for all. Why not? The disciples had seen other miracles by this point. This was not the first time they had faced a problem that didn't have an obvious solution. This was not the first time that Jesus had made the impossible possible. So why didn't Philip say something like, I don't know where we can buy bread, and besides, we don't have anywhere near enough money to feed this many, but I'm pretty sure you've got something planned. We know that you can solve this dilemma in a way that we can't even imagine. What are you going to do? Why didn't Andrew say, here's a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's not enough, but I know that you can do something amazing with it. So I wonder if this miracle was performed so that the disciples could stop seeing half empty and start seeing half full. Are we to focus on what we have, whether it's a whole lot or just a little tiny bit, and offer it up for blessing, instead of remaining focused on everything that we don't have and what can't be? Are we to release what we have, stand back, and watch those miracles happen? Now, the miracle itself is not recorded in detail. We don't know if it rained loaves and fishes from the heavens, if stones turned into food, or if baskets miraculously stayed full as they were passed from hand to hand to hand. That piece is not recorded. We simply don't know what happened. But we do know that everyone ate their fill, and there were 12 baskets left over. 12 baskets of leftovers from 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. It was truly a miracle, and the people recognized it as such. Now, I like to think if I'd been there, I would have seen the possible, of course. I would have gone, this Jesus person does some interesting things. This Jesus person makes the impossible possible. I'm just going to watch. But I'm fairly sure I would probably have thrown up my hands and say, it can't be done. We can't do this. There is no way for this problem to be solved. The optimism of childhood, though, still excites me just a little bit. I like the idea that anything can happen, and you need to pay attention. Now, perhaps you've heard there isn't enough. Perhaps you've said those words recently. They're fairly common words in our culture, unfortunately. Daily, we are fed the messages of lack, of little, of scarcity, and of want. Of needing to hold tightly to what we have because there isn't enough and there won't be more. Newspaper headlines focus on job losses and unemployment, rising costs and shrinking incomes. We learn about retirees forced back to work, post-secondary grads that are mired deeply in student loan debt. We probably know families that have good jobs and are working hard and yet seem barely able to get by. Even in churches, there are sometimes feelings of lack, of want, and of little. Our glass seems empty. There isn't enough. And I wonder if we, like the disciples in the text, are so focused on what isn't and what can't be that we are closed to even imagining the possible. So despite all these cultural messages of lack, of want, and of scarcity, we've been given much, and we have a lot to be thankful for. All of us, the tall and the small, have something that we can share. So why don't we? Why do we sometimes see the glass as half empty? Why do we sometimes like to focus on what isn't instead of what could be? Perhaps we're concerned that it's too little. It's only 5 loaves and 2 fish. It won't go far. Why even bother? We'll simply hold on to what we have, little though it is. We'll tuck it back in our pockets. Why even offer this little bit when it's obvious that it won't make a dent in the problem? Perhaps we're concerned that all we have are barley loaves, the loaves that feed the peasants. We look around and realize we are poor. We feel ashamed of our poverty, and so we sit quietly, unwilling to call attention to ourselves and our situation. Maybe we're concerned that others might laugh at our meager offering. Despite it being all that we have, we realize it's very little. So we sadly keep what we have rather than risk rejection or ridicule. We fear those who have more, and we regretfully grasp our little bit. And although we want to be generous and share what we have, we instead hunch down and sit in silence. Perhaps we're concerned about what we need. After all, we only have 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. It's hardly enough to sustain us. What about tomorrow and the day after that and the days after that? If we share, what will we have left? After all, there's only so much to go around. These all sound plausible, but we worship a God of miracles, and we are called to focus on what is, not what isn't. So what are the loaves and the fishes that you have been given? What are the skills and the talents that you possess? How might God use what you offer to change the world? The boy in our text today learned to care about others and share with those around him. And I wonder where he learned that. Now, most people, when you talk with people who give money to charity, who volunteer their time, who share what they have, would say they learned it at home. They learned it from parents. They learned it from grandparents or extended family, perhaps. I remember many experiences of generosity as a child, both people being generous to me and to my family, as well as my family encouraging me to be generous, and watching my parents share what they had. As I said, I grew up in a farm community, and there were lots of situations where my parents and grandparents had opportunity to assist a neighbor, perhaps someone who was sick, had problems with equipment during harvest or seeding. Perhaps a neighbor whose barn had burned down and needed their cattle taken in and looked after for a while. This was simply normal. It's what we did. You helped your neighbors because someday you would need help and they would help you. It was simply how life was. There was no question. And one of the many things I love about my job at Abundance is that I get to meet generous people and I get to hear their stories. And for many, they learned generosity as a child. I've heard stories of people who experienced want, who were refugees or immigrants, who were forced to flee and experienced being strangers in new places. Others have told me they grew up with a lot, and they were and are so grateful that they are delighted to share their plenty with those around them. I've heard stories of people who were poor but didn't know it. They recall instead having enough and being surrounded by love and joy, and they learned that happiness doesn't come from having a lot of stuff. People have told me of ministries that touched their lives and had such a profound impact that giving back is the least they feel they can do. And at Abundance, we talk with people about financial generosity, and that can be the hardest one of all. And we talk about practical ways that we can pass these beliefs of generosity and giving to our children, our grandchildren, and those around us. For young children, it's important that they have experiences of managing money on their own and learn how to share, how to save, and how to spend. The last one tends to come fairly easy. It usually doesn't need a lot of work. Yeah, see, you guys who have kids know this. Even for us grown-ups, that one's usually not a big problem. For older children, parents or grandparents could match their gifts to charity and take opportunities to help them learn about causes, find out why they want to support a particular issue or organization. Learning about charities and the work they do is important, I think. Some charities offer hands-on experiences for children, teens, young adults, and adults. My own church will sometimes plan things like comforter knottings or sorting cans for the food bank on days that children are out of school so that they can participate. And some of those skills and teachings and reasons that we do things can be passed along to younger generations. Some families make group donations, perhaps in lieu of Christmas or other celebrations. They will instead make a donation to a particular charity or charities. My colleagues' kids were influenced when one of their friends asked for food for the food bank instead of birthday presents one year when he was about 10. My colleagues' kids thought that was kind of neat. And so they decided they were going to do something similar. One wanted her friends to bring supplies for school kits. There's an organization in KW that gathers new school supplies to help out families whose kids can't afford new things like backpacks and pencil crayons and that sort of stuff. Another one arranged to knot comforters for his birthday, gathered his friends, set up some comforters, and knotted them, and then talked about what would happen to these comforters once they were knotted, where they'd go and who they would help. Even conversations about why you are generous can have a very significant impact. The church is one of very few places in our society that actively teaches that we need to care about those around us and to be generous to them. God does not need you to give so that what you have can be used to accomplish what needs to be done. God can do stuff. God instead invites us to give generously and in faith because it's important for our own spiritual development and growth as Christians. Everyone, the tall and the small, and all of us who are in between, the old, the young, and those of us who like to stay right there in the middle, we all have something that can be of use. We may think that we don't, that we're too old, we're too young, or that we simply don't have enough, but that is not true. We all have something to offer. We all have something that God can use. And we believe in a God of miracles, a God that can take that little that we have, whatever it is that we're willing to share, and do amazing things. So opening our hands to give means that we acknowledge that we have enough and that we have more than enough. We have enough that we can take some and share. Opening our hands to give means that we know everything we have is not ours alone. It belongs to God, and we are merely entrusted with it for a time. Opening our hands to give meat, we acknowledge that we, all of us, we are the hands and feet of Jesus in this world. We are called to put our beliefs into action, called to live our words, to look for opportunities, and to act with optimism and with faith. We are called to firmly and faithfully believe in a God who has the power to do amazing things. And when we do act in faith and share what we have been given, watch and pay attention, for the miracles will follow.